Good evening, everybody, and welcome to episode 5 of the Angel Mountain Show. As you will know, this is a series of chats, 7 in all, about the Angel Mountain stories. There are 8 volumes altogether and over 1 million words. And so it's quite a sizable work when it's seen as a whole. The question is that I want to address this evening: what is the saga all about? Is it a romance? Is it a tragedy? Well, yes, it's actually both of those. Is it an allegory? And it's that as well, of course, because most works of fiction, I suppose, are trying to send a message. All fiction consists of telling a large number of lies in pursuit of a portrayal of the truth. So it's a rather strange medium to be working in. But a lot of people have said that the story as a whole contains the depth and the width of Shakespeare, of the works of Shakespeare, in fact, which is quite a nice compliment. And I suppose I have actually tried as author to make sure that if not all of human life is contained in the stories, at least quite a substantial amount of it is. Both ranging, of course, right across from wonderful and beautiful virtue right through to the depths of depravity. And there's quite a lot of that in the stories. And indeed, they are occasionally extremely dark and extremely violent. So we've got all human life portrayed here. So the stories, of course, have one star, Martha Morgan herself, the heroine, and another star in the shape of Carningli, the mountain, which is ever present and a very powerful and dominating feature right through the stories. But most of the detail and the flavour within the stories, I suppose, comes from the interplay between good and evil. And that's true, I suppose, of most substantial literature. And so we have heroes and we have villains. Sometimes the heroes are in the ascendancy and sometimes the villains are in the ascendancy during these extremely dark and violent episodes in which Martha gets involved, sometimes rather unwisely. Anyway, let's just look at some of the heroes to start with. The first hero to appear in the stories is, of course, David Morgan, Martha's husband. She doesn't want to marry him originally, but she's very frightened and she's forced into a marriage, and she's a bit uncertain about her affection for David, but she grows to love him, and of course she is the mother of David's children. David shows his heroism in his all too short life, because he dies at a very young age, but he shows his heroism right at the beginning of the stories, because he gets involved in the French invasion. As soon as he hears that the French have landed near Fishguard in 1797, right at the beginning of the saga, his first instinct is to jump on a horse, pick up his musket, and go riding off to track down the enemy and to become involved in the defense of his own community. So he does that without thinking at all about his own safety, and off he goes, and he plays, as those of you who know the book will know, he plays quite a heroic part in the defeat of the French, and builds up a very substantial debt of honour from Lord Corder, who is in charge of the defensive troops who finally defeat the French. And that debt is something that's very important for the development of the saga. So David is the first of the heroes. The second of the heroes in the stories is Owain Larn, who's the second great love of Martha's life. He appears after the death of David, and he's a gentle and poetic man, but he has extraordinary courage. And his relationship with Martha is, of course, rudely interrupted when, shortly before they are due to get married, he disappears. He goes out to sea on a fishing trip and disappears without trace, and doesn't return for something like a decade. by which time Martha is set on marrying somebody else that she doesn't really love. And Owain shows his heroism in a variety of different ways. He puts himself in harm's way to protect Martha at various times, and ultimately, his final act of heroism really is that he refuses to marry Martha. He's actually seriously ill, and he knows he hasn't got long to live when he comes back from this 10 years away from Wales, during which time he had to put up with enormous deprivation and cruelty on the part of his captors. But he returns, he's a very sick man, and Martha still wants to marry him, but he refuses because he knows that if he was to marry Martha, with the laws of inheritance being what they are, there would start to be disputes over property, etc., etc., and Martha and her family would almost inevitably be the losers once he was dead and gone. So he refuses to marry Martha. He is a very heroic person in his own right, I think. And then the next hero is the third great love of Martha's life, Amos Jones, Jones minor prophet, who's a sort of itinerant theologian and evangelist. And I won't go into too much detail about his relationship with Martha, but he also sacrifices himself in an act of extraordinary heroism. He, in order to deflect attention from Martha, who is being pursued by a gang of extremely unpleasant people, he is actually lynched in Tyrconnell Wood, hung up from a tree, and dies. And Martha, in a very touching episode and a tribute to his own heroism in sacrificing himself, arranges for him to be buried in her secret cave on the mountain. And I had a rather interesting time writing the episode in which Amos is buried on the mountain and sealed into the cave with an extremely large stone. There are clear biblical references there to a holy man who has sacrificed himself for the greater good. So he's a great hero, and of course the hero who is almost ever present through the series is Joseph Harris, the wizard. I've mentioned a little bit about him already, but he is ever present. He protects Martha from all sorts of terrible occurrences, and ultimately he also dies without marrying Martha, although he has actually been in love with Martha for most of the time since he first met her. But he never declares his love, and Martha doesn't realize it until Joseph is on his deathbed. There are lots of other heroes as well through the stories, some of them making very fleeting appearances, and others who are almost ever present among the army of angels, in fact, who look after Martha all the time. So let's turn to the villains then. And what about them? Villains are always rather more interesting, I suppose, than heroes. Wickedness has a certain appeal about it. I've been able to portray the villains as quite colourful and deeply unpleasant characters. The first one that Martha encounters is Moses Lloyd, a very spooky, creepy sort of person who is infatuated with Martha. He's a manservant on the estate. He's infatuated with Martha, but she brushes him off. She discourages him from making any further approaches because he is a servant. She's a member of the gentry, of course. Upon which Moses disappears under rather acrimonious circumstances, vowing vengeance, and from that point on he stalks Martha. And Martha's final encounter with Moses in the cave up on the mountain, I won't describe it in any detail because that would spoil the story, but at any rate, I don't suppose it's spoiling it too much to say that Martha actually kills Moses in self-defense in the cave on the mountain. He is the first of many villains who come to a sticky end. The second one is Alban Watkins, who's one of a trio of minor gentry. And his relationship with Martha, his obsession with Martha is a complex one. He is obsessed with Martha because of her beauty, I suppose, most of the men who meet Martha fall in love with her one way or another. But he's also a member of the minor gentry existing in a rather peculiar set of circumstances in West Wales. The gentry in West Wales were living in a rather small pond. There were very small fishes in this small pond, and there were a few very big fishes. And most of the minor gentry were obsessed with expanding their empires, with getting good marriages for their sons and daughters, etc., etc. The estates were very small. They all built very large mansion houses, and they were all completely obsessed with expanding their estates and paying the mortgages that they had taken out. Most of them were deeply in debt, and this really drives the lust that these minor gentry have for good marriages and for Martha's estate, because Martha's estate, the estate of Plas-Ingley, is run by a woman, by Martha, in a very unconventional way. They greatly resent that. They resent the way that she treats her servants and her labourers. And so they're out to get her, three of them together. And Alban Watkins is the leader of this little gang. He's a very unpleasant character who gets shipped off to the colonies in Australia, and then he returns to hunt Martha down yet again. But he comes to a sticky end as well, although Martha herself is not the one who dispatches him. And then there are various other interesting characters as well. One of them is John Wesley Jumbie, who's a very large black man who appears in the story called Conspiracy of Angels, which is the last book of the series. He is involved in an extortion racket and is taking revenge on those members of the minor gentry who actually had dealings with the slave traffic. With many of the minor gentry, of course, owned shares in the little sailing vessels that were involved in shipping slaves back and forth across the Atlantic, mostly in one direction, of course, from West Africa to the Caribbean and to the United States. So he's got an evil character as well, although Martha develops a sort of rapport for him, but he comes to a sticky end as well. Like the rest of them. And then the nastiest person of all probably is one called Joshua Palmer, who appears in the darkest of the novels, the novel which is called Sacrifice. And he is a member of an extremely nasty secret society. He is actually he's obsessed with opium. He takes drugs. He's involved in a whole range of deeply unpleasant activities. And he is one of a gang again of three people who harbour enormous resentment against Martha, largely because of what she has done to bring some of their ancestors, to their fathers, their uncles, their grandfathers, to justice. Because Martha, she keeps on surviving. She's a survivor. And so she sees 3 generations of extremely nasty people from some of these gentry families. She sees them go to their graves, in fact, and sees many of them to the gallows. And there is always this feuding element in the stories, and indeed, as we all know, feuds were very, very common in Regency and Victorian Britain. So these are just some of the nasty characters. We have to ask, what are they driven by? As I've mentioned, they're driven by the lust for power. They're driven by an obsession with Martha, by resentment of what she is achieving as a woman in a man's world. Some of them are actually hunting for treasure, because Martha very foolishly, in the second of the stories, sets up a treasure hunt because she wants to catch the men who are responsible for the murder of her husband David. And in setting this trap, of course, she manages to capture the guilty parties, but the word is then out there that there is a treasure on the Plas-Ingley estate, as indeed there is, but Martha never divulges where it actually is. But all sorts of unpleasant people get to know of the presence of this treasure, and of course they are then obsessed with trying to find it and competing with one another sometimes in order to find it. So we have to ask about these people. Are they essentially or inherently evil, or are they like most people, are they people who have some good in them and some evil in them. Nothing is as black and white as we would like it to be. And indeed, as we discover in the stories, some of these characters, like Moses Lloyd, like Alban Watkins, are themselves people who have gone through all sorts of traumas as young men or as children, which go some way, I suppose, to explaining what sort of behavior they indulge themselves in later life. And so it's true as well, of course, that those who are the heroes are not perfect. Martha, the ultimate heroine here in the story, is not at all pleasant in some aspects of her character. And indeed, when we talk about this conflict between good and evil, she herself realizes that she takes too much pleasure sometimes in bringing evil men to justice. She feels that she harbors a bit too much vengeance in her breast. She is sometimes too vengeful in the way that she deals with people. And so she is greatly troubled by that. And I suppose that's typical of all of us in all walks of life, that we sometimes harbor instincts that we're proud of, and sometimes we harbor instincts that we're not at all proud of. So none of us is perfect, as they say, and not everything is black and white. Most things are in shades of grey. So that's enough then about some of our heroes and some of our villains in the stories. I'll finish it there for this evening, but tomorrow I'll talk a little bit, 7 o'clock again, on the Angel Mountain Facebook page. I'll talk a little bit about some of the eccentrics in the stories. And they are people that I had great fun writing about. And some of them are based on real characters, and some of them are people that I've invented for myself, and some of them are people who were a part of the story as it was originally given to me. So I look forward to seeing you at 7 o'clock tomorrow evening. And in the meantime, if you want to sign up for our little newsletter, please do that. The link is on the website. And if you sign up, send your email address, we'll add you to the mailing list, and we can send you out the next edition of the Angel Mountain newsletter. Okay, many thanks indeed. Keep safe. Thank you for watching. Bye-bye.